And I was like, that's a weird combination of two authors, but interesting. You know exactly where you are in time, that the like laws, the social culture, even the like gender inequality, like it's not a great thing, the gender inequality. The whole plot is that she and her cousin, I know it's kind of gross, weird, but I think they're step cousins. I don't know. Anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's just weird anyway. Like and subscribe. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Leandra the TBR0, and my goal is to lessen my physical TBR as much as I can, mainly because I just don't have the space for more books at this point. So I'll be discussing my January wrap-up. I ended up reading 7 books and I am really happy with the result. I can't say that I regret any book that I did read, which is always a good sign, and that's not always the case. The one thing I do have to admit, as Leandra the TBR0, is that I actually didn't read any book on my physical TBR.
With that said, there is a silver lining,
and that is that all of the books that I ended up reading were either library books, they were received through NetGalley as ARCs or advanced reader copies, or I ended up getting quite a few promotional reads. So those were copies, finished books that were gifted to me from the publisher. So I am so grateful for that opportunity. I know not everyone has that, so thank you so much. I only have about an hour before I'm supposed to leave for work, so I really don't have time to play around. So I'm gonna discuss my books starting now. The first book I ended up reading in January and in 2023 in general was Death of Jezebel by Christiana Brand. She is categorized as a Golden Age detective fiction author, and this particular title was published in 1948. The reason why I actually read it is because it is the February pick for the She Done It book club. If you have no idea what that is and you want to check it out, see if you want to participate and join this lovely community, then I will put a link in the description so you can go figure out what She Done It is, listen to some of the free episodes, and then see if you want to take the plunge and support She Done It so that it can continue making great content. Anyway, so I ended up listening to Death of Jezebel on audiobook because I just didn't have the time or ability to really get a physical copy. I didn't own it. I couldn't find it at a secondhand shop, and my local libraries just didn't have a physical copy, but Hoopla happened to have the audiobook, so I jumped at the chance. And I have a really weird relationship with audiobooks. I tend to love them so much because I do think that they're a great way to access literature from various places in your life, whether you are an avid reader and you just don't have time because of work, or maybe you aren't as avid of a reader but you do still want to consume this type of content. So audiobooks are lovely. I love the access that they provide to just every type of reader that exists. However, I have discovered through trial and error that sometimes audiobooks just aren't the best way to read a particular book, and I think that was the case with Death of Jezebel. I still ended up giving it 3 stars, but I am very adamant that I would have maybe given it 4 or 5 if I physically read it. And that's mainly just because it's quite a complicated plot. There are a lot of characters involved, and I was often distracted when I was listening. I was multitasking, working, or I was walking the streets of my town, and I was trying not to be a pedestrian casualty in a very busy traffic area. So I just don't think I was in the right headspace to be listening to it. With that said, this book had so many great aspects to it. It's an impossible crime, meaning that from, the general person's perspective, it seems as if no one could have possibly committed the crime, and yet here we are with a dead body. It's also a revenge plot, which I didn't expect going into it until I started doing research on the title itself. And it's just so funny because another book I read this month was Sad Cypress by Agatha Christie, which I will discuss as well. But both of them are revenge plots, and I just couldn't believe that I read them in the same week and that they had so much in common. I love when that happens because we don't really intend to do that, but I feel like it happens more often than we anticipate. So we have a whole cast of characters. Many of them are very unlikable, which I didn't fully dislike the fact that they were unlikable. Usually I don't care about that much, just because it kind of makes them easier to kind of kill off if that's what's going to happen. But what's even more interesting is that the tone of the first chapter is far more eerie and very tense. It almost gives me thriller vibes and like a lot of kind of noir hard-boiled vibes as well, mainly because it's a flashback to a previous time, and we follow the perspective of a man who will be dead by the end of the chapter. And he is just described as a very pure, innocent, naive soul. Everyone views him as just a good person. He's almost too good for his own good, and he's very devoted to his fiance. But during this chapter, he ends up discovering her in a compromising position with another man, and he just can't handle it. So he ends up driving recklessly, ends up taking his own life on the road. So it's just really almost disturbing. And then suddenly we have a flash forward to, modern day, 1947, 1948, where we're in the aftermath, and there's still a lot of animosity, a lot of tension in what happened, how some people are trying to cope with it and other people have just completely forgotten their part. And so then we start having, some poison pen notes where people are finding notes saying you're going to die soon. And all of these people are very pivotal in kind of the cause of this man's death. So it's really interesting, and I did enjoy that. And there's also a lot of humor, surprisingly, in this book, where people are just starting to make accusations or they're making confessions, and it's just everything's overlapping. And I really did love that kind of comedy of errors or absurd kind of atmosphere. But as I said, I think I would have liked it far more if I had physically read it rather than listening to it. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. With that said, though, I already know that Christiana Brand is a brilliant author. I own Green for Danger, haven't read it yet. That's probably her most well-known novel title. And I also recently, this past year, read Murder by the Book, which is a biblio-mysteries collection published by the British Library. Highly recommend it. And both myself and Carly at Bookish Pixie Reads adored the Christiana Brand short story, which is called Dear Editor. It was so good. So I know for a fact that the next time I come across Death of Jezebel in like a secondhand shop, I will be picking it up and making it a priority to reread it at some point without the audiobook. The next book that I ended up reading is actually The Grownup by Gillian Flynn. It was recommended to me by a friend. One of my goals for 2023 is to be a bit quicker at the draw of trying to read a book recommended by a friend, so I made sure to read this one as almost within a few weeks of her recommending it to me. And I have read Gillian Flynn before. This wasn't my first experience with her. During the craze of Gone Girl, I read that book and then proceeded to very quickly read Sharp Objects and Dark Places by her. So I'm very familiar with this thriller writer. But then after that kind of trifecta, I didn't really read anything by her up until this point. So it was really nice to reintroduce myself to this author who I had kind of just devoured in a very short amount of time. So with Grownup, it is actually more of a short story, but it's a very long short story. And I think it was originally published in a collection of stories, and then it was republished under a different name, which is The Grownup. I can't remember what the original name was. And it ends up being this really tiny booklet. Like, it was about this yay high, and it was like 60 something pages. So you really could read it in one day. I think I ended up breaking it up between 2 days. And for its length, I would say it was definitely worth the read. And obviously there was a choice made by the author to make it a short story. She didn't make it a novel length for a reason, and I think that fit perfectly for the format. It's really interesting. We definitely have thriller elements. We also have some horror elements involved because it did give me reminiscent feelings of The Haunting of Hill House, because there is a suggestion that this house in question is haunted. This family is kind of just being terrorized by each other, by the house itself. Things are happening that can't be explained. And our main character, who remains unnamed, she's kind of a lifelong con artist. So she thinks she's conning this family, getting money for kind of pretending that she's going to cleanse the house. But as the story progresses, she begins to feel even more convinced that maybe something is going on, and maybe this family is actually not in a safe place. Maybe she's not safe as well. So it is really eerie, and I really did enjoy the feelings that I got from it. The one thing I will say is it did also read as almost as like a draft, that maybe the story needed to go through a few more drafts before it was ready for publication. I have felt that before with certain things, especially when it comes to short stories, because authors do kind of have this deadline where obviously if they want a few short stories published, they need enough to make a book to then go send it out into the world. I absolutely adored Carmen Maria Machado's Her Body and Other Parties, but I felt that same way where a couple of the stories just didn't feel like they were in their final draft yet. I felt the same way with Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking. I feel like her editor and her agents and just the publisher in general let her down in letting that book be published a bit too soon, since her writing it. Like, she wrote it within like a year, and then a year later the book was out on stores, and I just don't think that that realistically makes sense. So anyway, so that's how I felt about this book. And it was weird because it seemed like it was dedicated, or at least like inspired by a request by, what's his name, J.R.R. Martin, who like apparently asked her to write him a story. So like in her little announcement, she's like, thanks for asking me to write this story. And I was like, that's a weird combination of two authors, but interesting. So yeah, so I do think that there were some aspects that just didn't seem fully polished. And I especially felt that way during this kind of, I don't know, there's a conversation between the main character and one of these other characters toward the end where it just seems that like she offers us multiple possible endings before one is kind of decided on, and it's just, it feels really chaotic. However, she did save it in the end, where the last few paragraphs just were so satisfying. So she definitely knows how to end a story, because that I still think about that ending, even though I found the entire story like meh. But if you want a short read, and especially if you're maybe in a reading slump, this is great to kind of get your confidence up, because it's a super short read, 64 pages or something like that. And I ended up giving that 3 stars as well. Okay, next read. I ended up reading Sad Cypress as my 3rd book for January, and I do happen to have a physical copy of it. I was really fortunate to be a part of a book tour promoting the latest monthly picks for Agatha Christie Limited's book club. Every year they end up choosing a different Agatha Christie title for 12 months of the year, and they have a hashtag on Instagram and I believe on Twitter that goes along with it, and it's hashtag #ReadChristie2023 this time around. And for this particular year, they're doing methods and motives as their theme. So for January, the theme was revenge. This was their official pick, Sad Cypress, but they also always end up providing alternative titles as well, in case you've already read this, in case you don't own this one but you want another one. So it's really lovely how flexible this book club is, and you just don't get that very often for obvious reasons, because it's not usually that easy to be flexible, but because Agatha Christie is so prolific, you know, she makes it easy for us. So I was really lucky that not only did I get to participate in this, but I haven't actually read Sad Cypress, nor do I own a physical copy of it. So I jumped at the chance to get it, and I was also really lucky to kind of get their official postcard that goes along with it. So it's really great, and I just thank you Agatha Christie Limited, and thank you William Morrow and HarperCollins for giving me this free copy. And needless to say, I adored it. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. It is such a fast-paced read. That's the main thing that I loved about it. It also has a lot of thriller elements. There is a heavy dependence on dialogue. So sometimes when I was reading it, I almost felt like I was reading a play, which kept the pace so fast. This was probably the fastest paced read that I read. And like I said, I just read The Grownup, which was only 64 pages, but I feel like I devoured this one more readily than I did that. So just a well done, fast-paced read for anyone who's looking for that particular mystery. It's an Hercule Poirot novel as well, and I believe it's like number 20. So it's right smack dab, kind of in the middle, toward the end of his own career, and he actually doesn't participate in it very much. For a majority of the book, for like the first half of the book, we're actually following the perspective of the woman who's on trial for murder, and the whole time we're wondering, did she do it, did she not do it? Even Hercule Poirot isn't fully certain if she did it or not, and it's really enjoyable how many thriller elements are thrown into this, because we are in her head. We do get her deepest, darkest thoughts towards the victim in question, and basically the whole plot is that she and her cousin, I know it's kind of gross, weird, but I think they're step cousins. I don't know. Anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's just weird anyway. So they're meant to get married, and as they're getting excited about it, their mutual aunt, she is sick. She's probably going to be dying soon, and they get this letter that someone in the house has infiltrated her aunt's competence and is probably going to try and like vie for the will to be changed. So they come running from London, and while they're there, they meet this person in question who's like meant to be this sinister person. She's just this lovely young girl, but people aren't sure, is she lovely, is she pretending to be lovely? And a lot of events happen. She ends up pretty much stealing the heart of our main character, Eleanor, of her betrothed, and so they end up having this huge severed like ending of their like, what is it called? I don't know what is it called. What is it called? engagement. so their engagement ends up getting broken at the same time that the aunt ends up dying, and she ends up dying in intestate, so she's like doesn't have a will, and that just means the person who's like closest to her in blood ends up getting everything, and that is Eleanor. So now Eleanor has all of the money, but she now doesn't have, you know, the perfect husband that she wanted, the perfect life, because now he's in love with this other woman, and it's just chaos ensues, and eventually this other woman ends up being killed, and she dies of poisoning, and everything leads to Eleanor, the main character, being the person who did it. And it's really well done. I really enjoyed it, and I can't recommend it enough. I think that it's perfect and an easy read for anyone who may want to try Agatha Christie. I think we usually end up thinking of like Murder on the Orient Express or The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Death on the Nile, those really well-known titles. And Sad Cypress is well-known too, but I don't think it's in the conversation nearly as much, and I would recommend this. I think most people who want to try Agatha Christie would probably enjoy this a good deal. So yeah, 5 stars, loved it. The 4th book that I ended up reading in January was Darcy Wilde's The Secret of the Lost Pearls. This is a historical fiction mystery, and it was published by Kensington just this past month. I was really lucky to not only get a physical ARC from the publisher, thank you so much, but they also sent me a finished copy, which I'm just in love with. I'm so fortunate to also have a physical copy of this book now, because I did love it so much, and now I just want to read all of the books in the series, because this is a part of a series. It's a useful woman mystery, and I want to say that it seems to almost have a spin-off now. Like, I think there are books that came before it that were under a different name. They were the Rosalind Thorne mysteries, because she is the main character, she's the amateur sleuth. But a Useful Woman series is now, I think, her taking the action to actually become, you know, a career woman in a sense, which is not typical because it's set during Regency era London. And oh my gosh, it is so atmospheric. If you really love historical fiction and you really enjoy the era that is the Regency era, so like early 1800s, and this is going to be your cup of tea. I really enjoyed it. She puts so much detail into making sure that you know exactly where you are in time, that the like laws, the social culture, even the like gender inequality, like it's not a great thing, the gender inequality, but the reaction that this cast of characters who are predominantly women, how they experience that and how they find their own agency through it is just brilliant. I loved almost every single woman character in this. They just were so vibrant. They were very aware of the social norms they had to do, their gender performance and what they could get out of it, and just how they could survive this like very restrictive society was just great. And the mystery was also really enjoyable. It is so fascinating because I feel like when it comes to the mystery genre, we always expect there to be murder. Murder mysteries are the thing, and I will say there is a murder that ends up happening in this book, but for a good amount of like the first half of the story, we are like engrossed in this mystery of lost pearls, and it like there are so many like domino effects for the fact that these pearls are missing and what it could mean depending on who took them. And it's really great. I loved the main character, who is our sleuth, Rosalind Thorne. She is just so level-headed, and I fully trusted her ability to like navigate this world, to calmly try to figure out what would be the best for herself and for those around her, to try to get to the like most positive solution with like the most discreet activity. What's particularly lovely is that this series is described as Jane Austen meets Sherlock Holmes, and you can tell that Darcy Wilde does make the effort to really blend the two together. We have opening lines of every chapter, like a quote from Jane Austen, which is just a nice little touch. And I just mentioned that I love Rosalind Thorne so much because she reminds me thoroughly of Sense and Sensibility's main character, Eleanor. So I know some people, you know, prefer Marianne when it comes to Sense and Sensibility, but I don't know, Eleanor's my cup of tea, and so of course Rosalind Thorne was. There's also this really nice romance going on between Rosalind and the main detective, and you learn a lot about the history, a lot about what's going on in England and in the UK in general. And I thought it was really well done. It was a great slow burn mystery, perfect for historical fiction mystery lovers. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I cannot wait to continue on and like return to these characters because it was just that good. The 5th book that I ended up reading in January was The Thing in the Snow by Sean Adams. This is another promotional read. It just came out in January 2023, and I really enjoyed it. But for reasons that I can't fully explain. It's a really complicated book, and I think my enjoyment is the fact that it's a very cerebral read. It made me think a lot, which is really fascinating. With that said, I only ended up giving it 3 stars, but I'll try to get into it and be succinct in my discussions of it. This is advertised as equal parts satire and equal parts a psychological thriller. So that seems really wild. It's really strange to think that one moment I'm laughing at the dialogue, I'm finding it really funny and really absurd, and then the next moment I am genuinely concerned for these people's health, for their safety. Will they make it out of this situation alive? It reminds me of like a workplace satire, which last year or 2 years ago now, I ended up reading Several People Are Typing by Calvin Kasalki, and I ate that up. I ate that up so fast because that was such a great book, and particularly because I could very much relate to a lot of it. So highly recommend it for those who have had strange workplace experiences. So it's really weird. For those who enjoy experimental reads, people who are bending genres and questioning or challenging genre norms, I definitely recommend this for you. I think that you would find it a fascinating read. And I regret not getting to read this in like a book club or even in an academic setting, because even though it is again categorized as satire and thriller, I think because it bends genre and it is so cerebral at times, I would actually label this more as literary fiction. So it follows this narrator who reminds me very much of either Gulliver in Gulliver's Travels or Michael Scott from The Office. So he is a supervisor and he needs to manage his team, and they are basically in charge of maintaining the structure, the facility that is the Northern Institute. And it's in this faraway place. You don't really know where it is, but you just know it's very cold all the time. It's always snowing, and 2 of the floors or 3 of the floors out of 6 are deeply under snow. So if you go down to the main ground, all the windows are packed in snow. You can't see anything. It's pitch black in there. So it's just a really interesting setting in itself, and they are sent tasks via helicopter once a week to try to complete things, and it's really mundane, but it feels important. So they're struggling to do that while also trying to not lose their minds, because they're very isolated, and the temperature is kept very cold just for apparently optimal saving of energy and time and probably money based on this company. So they're just constantly cold trying to work through these tasks, and it just seems like a really miserable experience. And then one day they end up noticing a thing in the snow. It's far enough away where they can't really see what it is, but it's been uncovered after a really huge storm, and it just becomes the thing they focus on so much. And they're asking these questions of the higher up who's hired them, who's far away, and she's either being evasive or vague or not sure what they're talking about. And it's really interesting to think about, how psychologically and how much a human can handle when they are set to multiple extremes at once, especially when it comes to the cold. I'm someone who enjoys the cold mainly because then I can bundle up in sweaters and everything like that, but obviously it's not enjoyable if you don't have any of those things. So it was really interesting. I would 100% read another book by him again. I just think that because it was so cerebral, there were times where it was a very slow read. It was very much in your head. It was very monotonous, and that was kind of the point of the author, to show the monotony of the workplace. But I did find it difficult sometimes to try to push myself to read a bit more quickly. So that's the only reason why I'm giving it 3 stars. But yeah, I would recommend it for the right audience for sure. The 6th book that I ended up reading was a Neck Alley arc, but because I loved it so much, I ended up buying it, and that is Just Murdered by Catherine Kovacic. I don't really know how to say her last name, so I apologize to the author if I completely obliterated it. This is such an interesting book for multiple reasons. One, it is the adaptation of a TV series that's a spin-off of a TV series that is an adaptation of an original book series. were you able to keep up with me? So the original series is the Phryne Fisher Mysteries. Those are set, I believe, in like the 1920s or 1930s, Melbourne, Australia. So just a really fascinating particular time that I don't think historical fiction mysteries cover very often, especially the location. I don't think we have many that are set in Australia. So that ended up turning into a TV series that's very successful. I've watched it. It's really enjoyable. And that ended up becoming a spin-off into Miss Fisher's modern murder mysteries, which like aren't actually that modern. They were set in the 60s. And that TV series has now become this first book in a series. So it's really kind of crazy. I love when those wild things happen like that. And I'm so grateful that it's become a book series, because just 1960s Melbourne in itself is such a great, vibrant setting. I loved all the references to the fashion, to the culture, to the pop culture references. And I usually am not that interested in that kind of thing, but the way that Kovacic does it, it's just so enjoyable and like really easy, flows off the page so nicely, and it just becomes a really rich setting that I 100% want to return to. I absolutely adored Peregrine Fisher. She is the niece of Phryne Fisher, who's, you know, the original detective in the Phryne Fisher mysteries, obviously. And Peregrine, she is just trying to find her home. She's been traveling a lot, like due to like certain situations with her mom growing up. And so when she ends up being called to Melbourne for like this mysterious inheritance, because she'd never really met Phryne before. She never knew that she existed, I don't think. And she comes to the Adventuresses Club at Greenwood Place, which I love the name because it's kind of a callback to Carrie Greenwood, who's the original author of the Phryne Fisher mysteries. And she just tries to find a place for herself. She's like, is this what I'm meant to be? Am I meant to take on my aunt's legacy? Because her aunt has actually recently gone missing, which in itself is another overarching kind of mysterious plot going on. She's like, am I meant to like take on the legacy? Should I be an amateur sleuth like her? Like, can I be a detective? And while this is happening, across town, there is a bridal show, like a modeling runway show going on at this department store. And during the grand finale, one of the models is discovered dead, and they know it's foul play. One of the adventuresses is actually the designer, and so she is currently the main suspect. And so Peregrine and others kind of have to make the effort to clear her name, and to do that they need to find the actual killer. So it's really fast paced, actually. I really enjoyed it in regards to Peregrine's like feminist like motivation. She is constantly trying to support her fellow women and like support herself when it comes to like the various like gender inequality that's going on. The treatment of women in this by certain men is just obviously the worst, and it's continuing today for various situations. And so I really liked that. I found it to be really fresh, and I loved the assertiveness of all of these women. The one thing I didn't really like, and I think that's why I ended up giving it 4 stars, was because there was like this weird trial that Peregrine had to go through, like a few couple tests to prove herself to the Adventuresses Club to actually join as a member. And I just found it really silly and kind of hypocritical, but like everything else was just lovely. She has this kind of like slow burn romance going on with one of the detectives like in the Melbourne police force, and he's like slowly helping her, like giving her information reluctantly, and just like they're getting on each other's nerves, and I love that so much. So I definitely recommend this for anyone who wants to also get into mysteries. I think it's an easy book to get into, historical fiction mysteries. And yeah, I can't wait now. I've never actually watched the TV show that this is particularly based off of, but now I'm like dying to do that. So yeah, Peregrine Fisher, she is a girl who can do it all, and I just love her. Finally, my last book of January, and it was perfect. And that is The Severed Thread by Leslie Vedder. This is another book that I was really lucky to participate in a promotional book tour, and it's a part of a series. It's the Bone Spindle series, and I have a story for you. So I already recorded my thoughts on The Severed Thread, but I feel like I didn't do a great job, so I'm just gonna do it again, and you're not gonna see the other one. So The Severed Thread is the second book in the Bone Spindle series. The Bone Spindle came out last February, and I absolutely adored it. I took a chance. It was one of my pre-orders actually for the year, and it's a YA fantasy, and I was so enraptured by these characters, especially the friendship between Fee and Shane. They are treasure hunters that are complete opposites, but they just blend together so well, and they end up supporting each other in the best ways. Like, I can't express that enough, how wonderful it is to see this type of friendship grow, just to the point where, like, at least whatever's going on in these books, including in book 2, they always have each other's backs, which you just don't see that enough. Like, usually there's like all these like miscommunication tropes or distrust amongst friends, and I really hate that. Whereas in this series, Leslie Vedder has always had them be on each other's side, and I can't show how much appreciation I have for that enough. And there's also like this great diversity amongst the romances. Yes, we have Fee and Briar Rose. He's the prince that she ends up having to like almost like save and then like join forces with to try to protect the entire kingdom with what's going on against the very evil Spindle Witch. And so that's very heteronormative. There's kind of an expectation there where they're becoming almost friends to lovers, because they also gain a friendship before they like move into anything else. But then we also have Shane and Red, and they are like enemies to lovers. Red is such a deliciously gray character where she's super complicated, but like as we grow to understand her in book 2, like she just becomes an even richer character. And so she and Shane, they have their own romance going on, and I don't know, I'm enraptured by these characters. I love how the cast has grown since book 2. We now get like thorough narrative like POVs from Red and Briar Rose, who were mainly secondary characters in book 1. So it's really grown as just like a world and like just like a group of people, which is great. And we just get to know these characters even more. I also like, I think I'm even more like biased because Shane, particularly the huntsman, she is someone that I have become so invested in. Like, she's not only one of my favorite characters of all time, but she would have just be like the best person that I would know of all time if she were a real person. She's someone you want on your side no matter what. She is so good to her friends. She is so good to the people she cares about, and she always does the right thing. Like, she doesn't even question it, which obviously sometimes is a bit reckless when she's like, nope, this is the right thing, we're doing it, like not even gonna like consider other options. But at the same time, it's just so pure. And I love her toughness. I love that she wields an axe and she doesn't take anyone else's shit. She's just great. And so this entire series, I think will be one that I'll want to reread. I can't wait for book 3. Of course, I have to wait another year for it, which is fine. But I am so grateful that I ended up being a part of this book tour. And I will end up having my own Instagram post for it coming out like on the 6th, I think I'm scheduled for. And you know I'll be gushing about it there too. So really, if you want a YA fantasy book series that you will become dedicated to, that has the diversity, whether it be LGBT plus representation or like in addition to like bi POC, like the main characters are white, but I will say that like there are a lot of like bi POC like very important secondary characters that are like recurring in books 1 and 2. So that's really nice to see that like Leslie Vedder seems to be like making the effort to try to do that, even if she does have like main characters who are white. So I can't recommend this enough. I ended up giving this book 5 stars, and yeah, that shouldn't surprise anyone for how much I've been talking about it. Okay, those are the 7 books I ended up reading in January. I hope you enjoyed listening to my own thoughts about these books, and maybe you've added a few to your own library or physical TBR in the future. I would not be mad at that, especially if they're the ones that I gave 5 stars or 4 stars to, because they're totally worth it. I really would like to know what you all read in January or what you intend to read in February. Was there a particular book that caught your eye? Please let me know so I can like force you to read it, because I would love that kind of position and power in your life. Don't forget, if you did get to the end, to give the video a like, consider subscribing, ring the bell so that you know when more content is coming up. And yeah, I don't know, comment suggestions that you'd like to know about me or about my channel or about my books. Yes, I think I hit everything. Good. And yeah, let me know if you actually disagreed with some of my thoughts. Like, were there some books that I gushed about and you're like, that was okay, but it wasn't for me? Because that would be nice to know too. I hope you all have a lovely reading month for February, and I can't wait to